The roster for the US World Cup Premier Championship is official alongside Morocco's and Ghana's. Papa Perez is sweating over this presidential candidate, and Spurs are after Savinho again? This is D-Mac Daily. So it turns out the leaks were legit. The squad that was first reported on prior to the official announcement turned out to be 100% accurate. Take notes, England. Now, I touched on it a few days ago, but it's only right that the primary host nation of this year's World Cup gets a comprehensive squad breakdown, because there's a lot to talk about in terms of the confirmed inclusions, the absentees, and beyond that, the way the players themselves were informed of their fate, because that alone has well and truly fried my brain. But first things first, we got to address the elephant in the room. Where is my goat? Where is the starting center forward himself? In the words of Didier Drogba, this is a disgrace. Crazy how this man just trolled his way to over 1 million followers in the space of a year, by the way. The ultimate grift. It's given me a lot to think about in regards to my own career with the Socceroos. But back to the Yanks, and we gotta start with the goalkeepers. Now, one thing we all know about this country is that they, for whatever reason, tend to produce top-level goalkeepers, from Tony Meola to Casey Kelly, then Brand Friedel, and after that, Tim Howard, who famously delivered the most saves in a single World Cup game, which is why I'm a tad underwhelmed with this current crop of keepers, with Matt Turner, Matt Freese, and Chris Brady selected, all three of which actively ply their trade in MLS. Turner is the most esteemed of the three. He's represented some big clubs throughout his career and held the #1 spot for the US in 2022's tournament, but in recent years he's struggled in Europe and has subsequently fallen down the pecking order to Matt Freese. The other keeper selected is 22-year-old Chris Brady, who looks a real gem for the future. He's never been capped previously at senior level, and I don't envision it'll happen in 2026, but maybe Pochettino wants to blood the next-gen shot stopper. Moving to the back line, and this is where it gets a little interesting. In terms of fullback or wingback options, one could argue this is literally their strongest department. Anthony Robertson on the left, Serginho Dest on the right, Scally, Freeman, Arfston, even Weyer as an attacking wingback option. They've got plenty to choose from. In terms of the centre backs though, it's not incredible. Chris Richards is a high-level player at Palace and looks to have recovered from a recent ankle injury, but the concern lies in the other options. Chris Ream is still going strong at 38, and I guess Robinson, Trusty, and McKenzie are all decent, but not great, and will probably struggle against elite opposition. They tried to pursue Bundesliga rising star Noah Kai Banks, but the 19-year-old didn't want to commit to the US so soon. So that's the backline. Whether Poch will play a back four or a back three, only time will tell. One thing we can probably guarantee, however, is a midfield consisting of a double pivot, a midfield reliant on Weston McKennie and Tyler Adams, both top-level footballers themselves. The problem, however, is the stark drop-off in quality in central midfield, because pending injury or suspension, the alternatives aren't overly exciting. In Berhalter and Roldan, sure, these guys are unreal in the MLS, but on the world stage, I don't think the US can rely on them personally. If fully fit, Cardoso would be a much better addition, but sadly he's been ruled out with injury. Another high-profile absentee in central midfield is Lyon's Tanner Tessman. I know he's been out with a muscle strain, but reports indicated that he'd have been available come the World Cup. This is a versatile player who could play in a variety of roles too, so that's a controversial call from Poch, as is the move to snub Aidan Morris, who's been cooking in the championship with Middlesbrough. Not surprised to see Musa not included though, because his performances have dropped off substantially in recent years. Now, it remains to be seen if the US will operate in a 4-2-3-1 or a 3-4-3, but if they do opt for a 10 of some sort, then they've got ample depth in that area between Tillman, Aronson, and Reyna. Then, in the forward line, is pretty decent in my eyes. Ironically, the biggest concern in that area comes from their best player, Christian Pulisic. His form has fallen off a cliff in 2026. 0 goals in 21 games at Milan. Even more worrisome is his international form, having not found the back of the net for his country since 2024. The LeBron James of soccer needs to step it up big time. In terms of striker options, I think the US have good depth in that department. Balogun ended the season in Monaco in spectacular fashion, as did Pepe at PSV, whilst Wright was Coventry's talisman in their promotion to the Prem. So all three will be full of confidence. Now, the big call was including Zendejas and Reyna. Many US fans feel as though Diego Luna was far more deserving of a call. This guy, who featured prominently in Nike World Cup promotion, I believe he was the 3rd most used player under Pochettino since stepping into the job. He also came in clutch in the Gold Cup last year. For him to miss out is incredibly harsh. But hot take here, I actually think his club teammate Xavier Gozo was even more unlucky. In his second full season as a pro, he has been tearing up in MLS. Surely you bring the youngster into camp just for the experience alone in future tournaments. Another harsh exclusion. All the more brutal considering the players were informed of their selection via email. What in the corporate America is this nonsense? Yes, according to The Athletic, all 55 preliminary squad members were sent an email whether they made the team or not. That is crazy work from Poch. But nonetheless, that's the squad in its entirety. It's not great. It's not bad though. Perhaps they can be inspired by Morocco's incredible run back in 2022, where they overachieved massively despite not possessing a team full of superstars. Don't get me wrong, they had an abundance of quality, but my overarching point here is the US can give a good account of themselves if Poch gets it right. Their group is highly competitive, but I expect them to advance. Beyond the round of 16 is where I think it gets really tricky. For me, the absolute best case outcome for the US is a quarter-final appearance. Anything beyond that seems insane, but what do we think of the Yanks squad and chances at this year's World Cup? Let me know below. Heading over to Spanish football news, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, Real Madrid are heading into a genuinely contested presidential election. Now, that alone is significant, right? Because Florentino Perez has largely operated as president without any opposition, not simply because of his overwhelming popularity, but because Perez literally broke the electoral system. Yes, in 2012, he changed the guidelines so that to even stand for election, candidates must have been club members for at least 20 uninterrupted years and personally provide a financial guarantee worth 15% of the club's annual budget, currently around 187 million euros. Crucially, that guarantee must come from the candidate's own assets without any external investors or consortium backing. So those rules have effectively created an enormous institutional barrier protecting the presidency, which is why ever since returning to power in 2009, Perez has repeatedly been re-elected unopposed, because very few individuals in world football possess both the financial capability and the obscure membership requirements to be eligible. Madrid's membership system is also relatively closed, with new memberships often tied to family lineage, again reinforcing the club's embedded political structure. So that is why Enrique Riquelme's emergence is such a major story. The renewable energy tycoon and founder of Cox Energy has officially entered the race, becoming the first serious challenger to Perez since he stepped into the job. While Riquelme has openly praised Perez as arguably the greatest president in Real Madrid history, he believes the club has become too centralized and politically inaccessible under the current structure. His campaign is built around what he describes as democracy, transparency, and a new cycle. The exact opposite of Perez. One of Riquelme's core objectives is also reconnecting the club with its socios, aka the club members. He argues that many members feel increasingly disconnected from institutional decisions and wants greater participation, more open dialogue. On the sporting side, Riquelme wants to modernize Real Madrid's football structure. He has proposed appointing a dedicated sporting director to oversee long-term recruitment and squad planning. He also wants increased emphasis on academy integration and sustainable sporting planning rather than relying almost entirely on blockbuster transfers. That being said though, he understands the culture of Real Madrid still demands ambition and star power. Spanish reports suggest Riquelme has already lined up 2 potential marquee signings should he win the election, though no names have officially been confirmed. His project also includes expanding investment into Real Madrid Femenino, the basketball division, and transforming Real Madrid TV into a more modern global media platform. Meanwhile, Perez is campaigning on continuity and legacy, I guess. Despite recent criticism following 2 trophyless seasons, he does remain an immensely powerful figure within the institution after overseeing one of the most successful periods in football history, including 7 Champions League titles during his presidency and the complete redevelopment of the Santiago Bernabeu. But regardless of who wins, the election already feels historic because for the first time in many years, Real Madrid's political structure is actually being openly challenged. Moving to transfer news, and Savinho to Spurs again? Yes, according to Fabrizio Romano, Tottenham have now reactivated talks with Manchester City over a potential deal for the Brazilian winger, with the player himself apparently more open to the move. Remember back in 2025, Tottenham made a serious attempt to sign the winger last summer, and it looked as though a deal was on the cards until City abruptly pulled the plug on negotiations late in the process, with Pep essentially reiterating the Brazilian's importance to the City project, convincing him to stay and sign a contract extension until 2031. However, another season has passed at the Etihad, and Savinho has once again struggled to make a significant impact, with limited minutes across all competitions, as Pep favoured other attacking personnel. The Brazilian then fell even further down the pecking order once Savinho arrived in January. I feel for him in a way because he's clearly very talented, and his performances and output at Girona 2 seasons ago were outstanding, but at the highest level, he just hasn't quite delivered yet. You ask the average City fan, and they'll all say the same thing, that he's very talented in terms of dribbling and creativity, but the end product is not at an elite level. I mean, 7 goals in 84 City games doesn't read great on paper. Do I think he could succeed at a club like Spurs? Personally, yes. He's only 22, and perhaps in an environment where he feels more valued, he'll flourish. However, the stumbling block to a deal could be the price. City don't want to sell for anything less than £60 million, but I think Spurs would be crazy to drop that kind of money on a player like Savinho. Newcastle are also reportedly keen on the player, which probably makes more sense. Their current right-wing options aren't great, so keep an eye on this transfer in the coming weeks and months ahead. Meanwhile, another winger could be on the move shortly, with one of Germany's brightest young talents, Said El-Maya, now attracting major Premier League interest. FM players, if you know, you know, but the 19-year-old wonder kid has exploded onto the scene this season, registering 13 goals and 5 assists in his first full Bundesliga campaign with Köln. His performances have rapidly elevated him into one of the most highly rated young wingers in Europe, drawing attention from clubs like Bayern Munich, Chelsea, Brighton, and Newcastle. However, Brentford now appear to be leading the race, having tabled a formal bid in the region of 45 million euros, according to Florian Plettenberg, with the journalists insisting that Köln are currently holding out for 50 mil. Now, the player himself hasn't agreed terms yet. I'd imagine his team are keeping his options open, but I personally think this would be a perfect environment for him. He goes to Bayern or even a Chelsea at this stage of his career, and the expectations are much higher, whereas at a club like Brentford, his development will no doubt be prioritized. I personally think it's a sensible move. Moving back to international football news, and Morocco's squad is in for the World Cup, and immediately some notable absentees stick out. The likes of En-Nesyri and Hakim Ziyech, both tied as the nation's 3rd all-time leading goal scorers. En-Nesyri in particular, I'm shocked he's not on the plane. He played in every game in AFCON back in January. Just a huge call. That being said, it's still a very strong team. Got all the big names there still, the likes of Bunu, Hakimi, Aged, Amrabat, Onahi. Diaz is looking to make up for his AFCON final blunder. There's plenty of firepower in that front third too, with Saibari, El Kanous, Ezalzouli, Gessim, baller by the way, Talbi, and Amai Mooney. For me, I'm most excited about Ayoub Bouadi's inclusion in central midfield. This guy was destined to be the future of French football up until recently. Now he's suddenly committed to Morocco. A great acquisition for the next gen of Moroccan football. They've also picked up Issa Diop, so that's further experience in the backline. Big pressure on their new manager Mohamed Ouabi. However, I think the Atlas Lions have a good chance of producing another stellar World Cup campaign. We also saw Ghana release their preliminary squad of 28 players. They'll have to soon colour further 2 names come the 1st of June for the final squad. Guys, we're 15 days away from football's biggest spectacle. I'm excited. I hope you are too. Anyways, thanks for tuning into today's DMAC Daily, and I'll see you tomorrow.